Hello and welcome to this very special event. I've been so excited about this event. I'm environmental journalist Lucy Siegle, but you don't need to care about that because we've got an amazing panel for you this evening. Welcome, as I say. This special session is hosted by 5x15 and Zetler. Thank you for them. Thank you mainly for joining us. I know there are a lot of demands on your time, so thanks for being here. Tonight we're going to discuss diverse perspectives on the climate and nature emergency, and we're going to explore new ways of thinking about the all-important subject of transition. We have an incredible lineup this evening. I'll introduce you to everyone as we go along. First of all, big thanks to our British Sign Language interpreters, Anna Haig and Catherine Neal, who are busy thanking themselves as I speak. So brilliant to have you with us tonight. Now, as we start 2022, climate and nature catastrophe is looming, but the future is still ours for the shaping. It's profound stuff. And so after COP26, what needs to change and how do we change it? So often missing from the conversation. How can we as a society make the industrial, economic and ecological transformations needed to restore that broken human nature relationship in our time right now, starting right now? These are the questions that global tech giant Hitachi and the innovation design studio Takram set out to answer with their project and interactive digital experience, 3 Transitions for a Human Nature Recovery. In November 2021, Hitachi presented the project to an audience of world leaders and the wider public at COP26 in Glasgow, and the link is in the chat, so have a look at that. It's fascinating. This special panel event brings the Hitachi Takram team together with leading thinkers and activists in the field of sustainability. We're going to meet this extraordinary group shortly, and the format is simple: short, rapid-fire introductory talks from each of our speakers on a transition that they think is necessary to ensure the planet's climate, biodiversity, and human life. Then afterwards, we will have a panel discussion in time-honored tradition. Now, if you have questions for our speakers, and I think you are going to have questions, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. We are going to get through as many of those as we can towards the final part of the session. Our hashtag tonight is hashtag 5x15 stories. 5x15 stories. Got that? Okay, now first up, we have a short introduction from Koji Sasaki, PhD, who is Chief Researcher at Hitachi and Senior Researcher at Keio University, an anthropologist based in Tokyo. He has played key roles in landing projects in migration, urbanism, technology, sustainability and design with academic institutions and creative studios in Japan. And for Hitachi, he has provided visions for various anthropologically informed projects, including 3 Transitions for a Human Nature Recovery. Now, he's joining us at 2:30 a.m. or whatever it is. Thank you so much for doing that. And he's joined by Yusuke Oshigomi, who is Director and Creative Technologist at Takram, the design innovation studio with bases in Tokyo, London, New York, and Shanghai. He's the winner of the 2018 Swarovski Designers of the Future Award, and he is an advocate of transition design, designing for the processes of change as well as its outcome. And he writes and speaks on the intersection of tech, design, and society. I had the pleasure of meeting these guys online a couple of days ago. This is going to be amazing. So Koji Sasaki and Yusuke Oshigome, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucy. My name is Koji Sasaki. I'm a chief researcher at Hitachi. Hitachi is a major manufacturing company based in Japan with a broad range of business in the world. I'd say that it is a company that is focused on building secure and resilient social infrastructures. In Europe, it is known for providing trains for some of the major railway projects. I am one of the very few anthropologists working for the company, and in the past few years, I've been collaborating with various actors to build visions for a sustainable future. I am extremely honored to be part of this event and really looking forward to the discussion.
And I'm Yosuke Ushigome, director at Takram, a design studio based in London, Tokyo, New York, and Shanghai. And our practice in London, the team I lead, is primarily focused on creating tools to engage with futures. So we try to use design not to make people buy things, but to make people think and dream about futures and discuss what we do today. So we've been working together for maybe the last 2 years, right, Koji?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you want to give a little bit of introduction and background of the project?
Cool. So I'd like to start with the genesis of our projects on transition. It started in the beginning of the year 2020, like Yosuke said. It was a time when we went from being completely ignorant about the little virus to seeing the whole world being thrown into the bio crisis. I was at the time hoping to produce a set of recommendations for Hitachi to become a deeply sustainable company. I wanted to draw on the most advanced social and environmental thinking of the time, creating a kind of manifesto for the future of its business. As part of the project, I had asked Takram to help us explore how the creative professionals in the world, such as artists, designers, and architects, were developing the new kinds of engagement with the natural environment. We called it New Ecologies Project. As the coronavirus situation continued, we found ourselves to be in what anthropologists would call a moment of liminality. Liminality is a temporary social state where the older order has collapsed, but the new order has not established yet. So we wanted to use this highly disorienting in-between situation at the time to reflect on the kinds of possible world we really want to build after the pandemic. We wanted to analyze the deeply locked-in situation that we had about energy, consumption, and biodiversity, and imagine a world that is truly sustainable. We wanted to identify the pathways that connect between the two realities, the world we have and the world we want. I asked Yosuke if he could help us study the narratives of the sustainability leaders to learn about the transition they aspire to make happen and create a really good website where people can have easy access to the research. We talked to and studied various people and organizations in the world, such as IPBES and Forum for the Future, and built a website where people can learn about the 9 different transitions that emerged out of our dialogues with the experts. In 2021, Hitachi became a principal partner for the COP26, and we were given an opportunity to present some of the ideas we developed around the theme of transition. Here we chose to step forward to focus on the broken relationship between humans and nature that is causing the situation of Anthropocene. We thought that three of transitions are the most urgent and significant, which are climate, biodiversity, and human life. We created a website in the hope of inviting people to explore the profound interconnectedness of the humans and nature. Yosuke will show you what it looks like.
Okay, so I'm gonna introduce 3transitions.earth. There's a little introductory video at the beginning of the website experience, so I'm gonna play that first.
The world is at a tipping point. Wildfires, extreme weather, marine pollution, and the pandemic all point to the same conclusion. Our current relationship with nature isn't working. Human prosperity comes at the expense of the planet. We urgently need a new vision. A better way of living that works with nature, restoring biodiversity and stabilizing the climate. Achieving this is a huge challenge, and it can be hard to know where to start. This website approaches these big issues by focusing on transitions, the journeys we need to take, as well as the destinations, framing each problem in terms of obstacles and breakthroughs. Here, we explore 3 transitions: climate, biodiversity, and human life. They're all highly interconnected, and our action in one area will inevitably influence the others. Explore these transitions today, and let's start building the sustainable world we want.
So the website shows 3 transitions, and each transition is represented by the world we have, the world we want, and the pathways towards the world we want. And if you look at, for example, the human life transition, it's from the extractive world we have to the just world we want. And we tried to use illustration and sound design to capture the positivity and the empowering nature of the visions that we can come up with from this moment full of crisis. We also tried to back it up by a dozen of key traits that we identified through research. But how do we get to these visions? That's where the pathways are important. Each pathway represents a key area in which we need transformation, and it's broken down into obstacle and breakthrough. For example, in creating fairer, more equal communities, the obstacle is the lack of inclusiveness in decision making, and its potential breakthrough is to empower, protect, and collaborate with local and marginalized communities. What we also wanted to highlight is the intersectional nature of these breakthroughs and obstacles. So if you click one of these links, it also shows how this breakthrough in human life transition is highly connected with, in this case, another breakthrough in climate decision making. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left to go deeper in this website, but I hope you take some time to have a look at 3transitions.earth later. Thank you.
So what we wanted to achieve with the website is to help people imagine a transition from the repeated patterns of our modern civilization, where humans seek to prosper by destroying the nature, and to a radically new way of human living, where we prosper by restoring it. To do so, we were very lucky to have Yosuke as partner, who is an expert in speculative design, which is a practice of design where we focus on imagining and dreaming about the possible futures. So a little invitation to a speculative anthropology on the future of human-nature relationship is what this project is all about. We hope that this event also becomes a forum for reimagining the futures we really want and figuring out the creative pathways to achieve them. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. It's such a fascinating idea, concept, and website. Could you please all check out the website, because we had a few technical hitches there. It's so beautifully done. I urge you to have a look, but obviously not right now, but after this event, you will be addicted to it, I promise you. Koji and UCK will bring you back at right at the end, if that's okay, because now we're going to push forward and we're going to unwrap some of the things that you've presented, some of the ideas that you've presented. Whether it is food, fashion, the flights we take, the fuel that runs our heating and cars, all of us need to challenge ourselves and change our lifestyles if we are really going to do the work, reduce the emissions and restore nature. Now, our panelists tonight are each going to help us think out and map the transitions we could make to create a greener, fairer planet. How can transition thinking help us to start 2022 with optimism and purpose after COP26? So that's the challenge. We've got 6 minutes each for their opening thoughts and then the group discussion, as you know. Okay, our first amazing panelist, Mikaela Loach, is a climate justice activist, campaigner, and co-host of the Yikes podcast, which I absolutely love. She is one of the 3 claimants who took the UK government to court to challenge the Oil and Gas Association's policy in the North Sea and the subsidies and tax breaks the industry is given. Over to you, Mikaela, to kick us off with your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And it was super interesting to see the research that everyone is doing. And I'm so honoured to be here alongside so many wonderful activists. So I'm going to try and keep to time. I'm going to be talking about the need for a transition in mindset away from thinking that a hero is going to come and save us into realizing that we all need to save ourselves, moving from focusing on individuals into being part of the collective and joining movements to create change, moving from thinking that things will just get better into making those things better ourselves, moving from just telling activists that they're inspirational whilst not actually doing anything practical with that inspiration. and moving from passive citizens into active ones, because it's active citizens that have the ability to transform the world. We can change so much when we decide to become active members in creating that change. So I'm going to use an example here of the Stop Cambo campaign. So people might have heard about Cambo. So Cambo is a huge oil field off the coast of Shetland in the North Sea in Scotland that was set to be approved last summer, actually. So the Cambo was a huge oil field. It was set to be approved by, it was pushed to be approved by Siegle Energy, Shell and the UK government. And they're trying to push that approval through last year. And in just 6 months of campaigning, we managed to stop this field for now from being approved. So Cambo's oil field was filled with 170 million barrels of oil, and the emissions from production and burning of that oil field alone is equivalent to 10 times the annual emissions of Scotland. It's a huge field, and it would have a huge impact on the climate if it was extracted from. It was set to be approved in the same time that the IEA, the International Energy Agency, which is a very conservative body, had actually said that we can have no new investment in oil and gas if we want a livable future. Also around the same time as the IPCC came out with their most recent report, which kind of affirmed these concerns, and also taught us that every single degree of warming that we can prevent matters. And that means that every fossil fuel field that we can stop being approved matters. And also, it was in the same year that the UK government was hosting COP26. So I think they have no shame, it seems, when it comes to when they decide to do these things. So friends I have who worked at environmental NGOs or who are activists or know people wanting to create change have been watching these oil fields go through approvals year after year without anything happening, without there being public outrage. And through my involvement in the Paid to Pollute court case that was mentioned before, I found out about the Cambo oil field and joined the group coming together to oppose it. At this point, it was the summer and the field was set to be approved in the following month or following months. We launched the campaign on social media. We created social media assets that reached millions of people. Folks with Fossil-Free London staged an action outside of Shell's headquarters in London. Up in Scotland, we organised an occupation of the UK government's building in Edinburgh for almost 10 hours, ending with a spontaneous rally that was attended by hundreds of brilliant people who were coming out to show that they opposed this oil field. Months passed and we handed in our petition of over 80,000 signatures to 10 Downing Street. We had a concerted media campaign that meant that Boris Johnson was asked by pretty much every journalist, if he was ever asked about climate, about the Cambo oil field. Nicola Sturgeon was forced to come out in opposition to this field, as was Keir Starmer. And my friend Lauren McDonald actually challenged the Shell CEO at TED Countdown about the Cambo oil field. Pressure was being put by so many different people from so many different angles. And that was because people decided to be active and come together to make it. At COP, Cambo became the issue to be talked about when talking to government ministers. And at debates that I went to, at TV debates, there are random people that I'd never met or never organised with who were asking questions to ministers about the Cambo oil field. This campaign became so much bigger than the few groups that started it in the first place. After all of this, after only 6 months, or less than 6 months actually, Shell came out and decided to no longer invest in the Cambo oil field. And this was called a death knell by people within the industry for big oil and gas projects in the North Sea. It was a huge, huge, huge deal. And only a month later, we also saw that Siegle Energy decided to pause the field indefinitely, and that's where we're at now. So some people might see this having happened and think, oh, this was inevitable. This was just going to happen. It was going to be stopped. But the reality is that it would not have been stopped if it wasn't for all the people, all the ordinary people like myself, like so many others, who came behind this campaign to stop this field from happening. Because change is an active process. It's not passive. Things don't just get better. We have to make them better. And it means that individuals have to realize that all of us have a role to play and all of us have to be active parts of creating that change. I think so often we expect that the right thing is going to happen without us doing anything, but that is just false. And we can look throughout history and see that too. So if we manage to stop an oil field from being approved in 6 months, think about all the things that we can do if even more of us come together. And actually this year, the UK government is set to approve many, many more oil and gas fields in the UK. And all of us need to be active in opposing that. Because if the IPCC report showed us anything, it's that every single degree of warming that we can prevent matters. That's every single degree. So every single fossil fuel project we stop matters. We have to stop all of them. There's so many more coming, and we need to be active in being part of that. So that's why I think we need to change our mindset in being from passive to active.
Thank you, Mikaela. It's so fascinating to learn more about how Cambo came about. And of course, you just assume this is the only thing, and you don't conceptually realize that these things were being passed all the time until you made a change and you decided actively to find solutions or ways of stopping it. Let's unwrap more of that when we come back to our chat. I've got so many questions for you. For now, we're going to move on to our next amazing speaker, Sir Tim Smit. Really needs no introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway. He's the co-founder and executive vice chair of the Eden Project, which saw a decommissioned quarry transformed into a cradle of life and a powerful exploration of human dependence on and part within the systems of the natural world. So Tim is also a director of the Lost Gardens of Heligan and executive co-chair for Eden Project International, which creates Eden Projects and with partners on every inhabited continent. Welcome, Tim, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy. And Mikaela, what a star. That was so inspiring. Thank you. My job, I think, is just to throw a couple of pebbles in the pond. About 5,500 meters beneath my ass, we have a pipeline that is hitting hot rocks at and getting 187 degrees centigrade. The revolutions that everybody keeps talking about in places like London is actually happening. We're going through a greater change at the moment than at any time since 1912 to 1920. We think that we've had a lot of changes post-Second World War, but actually they've been iterations. I mean, no one saw the DVD, the CD, the computer in the house, the smartphone, or any of those things. But what's really interesting is how in a world dominated by rather dull middle-aged men, no one actually learns from the shocks of the past which are shaping our future. As we speak, talking about change, the radical change that is actually taking place is monster. We have on the west coast of America, we've got the clean food movement, which went from £1.8 billion turnover last year to more than double that in this coming year, with the Chinese now about to invest a huge amount of money into this. And the reason why is because the mass growing of livestock is just not sustainable in China. This is going to have a huge impact, for example, on the demand for soy from Brazil and so on. You can write the rest of the script yourself. But alongside that, you've got fermentation technology. Most people don't understand it, but let me explain a big tree in a small pot. How did that tree get big? Was it the roots eating stuff from the soil? No, it wasn't. The trees actually eat mainly from the air, sunlight, and also proteins out of the air. And this technology is now being made really seriously successful. Dairy protein at the moment costs about 30% of real dairy protein. What I mean is fake dairy costs about 30% of real dairy. You can write the script here, what's going to happen around the world in terms of the price of food. Everything that I believed in the 1960s going into the early 1970s is strangely going to come true, but in a rather weird way. This means that cheap food will be available anywhere in the world with fermentation technology. It means that you can be in the middle of Chad, you can be in the Rift Valley, you can be in South America, producing food from proteins from the air, and it will be cheap. Just like electric transport will be cheap. Probably by the time the next COP comes around, we will already be talking about hydrogen vehicles as well. Within probably 3 years, there'll be no factories anywhere in the world producing combustion engines of any type that we know. How's that going to impact on us? Well, it's going to impact on us massively. Every city in the world, the property developers should now be buying the ugliest properties right next to the big roads. Those roads won't be needed. Humans won't be driving, which is a great relief to absolutely everybody, but it does mean that the journey which has begun, we've seen in our project in China, how big cities, in our case Qingdao, but big cities are going to be transformed into collections of villages. And those villages will become greener and greener and greener. And for those of you doubting me, go and see the James Hutton Institute just outside Dundee. This is not Chelsea sheep growing things in derelict underground stations. This is serious horticulture growing vertically 50 feet into the sky by about 20 feet long. These containers can feed a small village of 500 people with vegetables. They can also grow trees and they can inject mycorrhiza into the soil. This revolution is happening and it's scaling. So we've got electric vehicles, which are going to be shared. We've got different types of fuel. How is that going to impact on the agricultural revolution I discussed just now with fermentation and clean meat? It's going to be monster, because what most people don't seem to realize is that once you've got a renewable energy everywhere, the renewable energy can be used and it doesn't really cost you very much, which means that you can heat things, which means that you can grow crops that otherwise you'd be growing somewhere else. I imagine that within 15 to 20 years, every town in Britain, probably every town anywhere in the world, will be able to grow pretty much whatever it needs within 20 miles of itself. Big agriculture is going to retreat down a tube. Now, where does that leave us? It leaves us in a world getting much, much richer in terms of the redistribution of wealth. But the thing that's going to drive it all is actually something which was started by the pandemic. But at COP, I spent a lot of time with the people who are from Terracotta, you know, Prince Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative. It is astonishing when you see these people who are in charge, in this particular case, of about 25 trillion pounds worth of assets. They've been completely changed in about a period of 2 years. And they suddenly realize that the age of the citizen is coming. The age of the consumer is dying. It is dying everywhere, but no one sees it quite yet, but it is coming towards us. And that is because most people now realize that the moral compass that they actually believe in isn't actually so much about law. It is a spiritual awareness. In a largely secular age, it is a realization that we've got to bind ourselves to the working of nature. Well, what is the final point that I wish to make? Well, it's a rather startling one. I believe that probably within 20 to 30 years, you're going to see the death of the nation state, because with 3D printing, which you will be able to do digitally, and I have seen on 2 of our projects, one in China and one here in the UK, with 3D printing, advanced digital connectivity with cheap transport, with cheap renewable energy to grow what you like, wherever you are will become the center of the world. Now tell me, what is central government actually going to be bringing us? I would argue that other than defense, very, very little. The world does remain ours to make, and the future very much remains ours to make, provided we make way for the young people to come through. They can see this thing. The people like me need to get off the stage, and that's all I want to say.
Don't get off the stage. That was brilliant. I think central government is doing a good job in making itself obsolete by being ridiculous at the moment. But anyway, that's a different story. So many questions. We will come back to you, Tim. Incredible stuff as usual. We're going to go on to our next speaker. Now, Aja Barber is a writer, stylist and consultant whose work deals with the intersection of sustainability and the fashion landscape, an area very close to my heart. Her first book, Consumed, it's brilliant, please read it, explores the endemic injustices in our consumer industries and confronts the uncomfortable truth, which she does with a huge amounts of courage and charm, and it's very entertaining, by the way, behind why we consume the way we do. Over to you, Aja.
Well, following after Tim and that amazing intro, I'm a bit under pressure now. I'm really eager to get to the chat, so I'm going to keep my intro really brief. I'm supposed to talk for 6 minutes, but let's do 3. So I am the author of Consumed, and the book is The Need for Collective Change, Colonialism, Climate Change, and Consumerism. And in the book, I make the point that all of these issues are tied together. Now, I originally did not write about all of these issues together. I used to write about fashion over here, and then I would write about racism over here and feminism over here. And there became a point where it hit me really hard one day that actually all of these issues should be constantly written about together because they all intersect. If you are in your living room right now and you look around at the room that you're in, you will find an item within your line of eyesight that has been made in the global south. And very often, there's a very good chance that whoever made that item wasn't paid fairly for that. And when it comes to the clothing that we wear, a lot of these issues can feel very, very overwhelming, I think. But when it comes to what we put on our body, how much of it we choose to buy it, how we choose to participate in these systems, I think that we actually have quite a lot of power. And on my platforms, I try and encourage people to harness that power, but also to think twice, because Instagram, as much as it has brought a lot of lovely people my way, replaced their like button with a shopping button. They move the like button, because here's the thing with these brilliant little phones that we all have. Those phones train our brain to do certain things, and we become very addicted to certain things. So when you're addicted to hitting a like button and it's replaced with shopping, that gives you more options for shopping. And the truth of the matter is, I don't actually monetize my platform in a traditional way, because I truly believe that a lot of the platforms that exist that are constantly selling things have tenfold aided in the fast fashion problems that we're all seeing today. And so I write to help people to understand about sustainability and why we have a real need for that, because fast fashion and disposable clothing has been sold to us as a harmless thing. But the truth of the matter is that for every low cost you see, there is a human price attached to that. So it might be extremely low cost for you, but perhaps the garment worker didn't get paid. It might be very, very affordable for you, but perhaps the person who harvested the cotton, which went into the dress, didn't get paid a fair wage. Somebody always eats that cost, and it's never the corporation. And it's important for all of us to understand that 80% of garment workers are women. It was an estimate that in the UK, we wear our clothing 7 times, and Lucy Siegle did an amazing campaign about this. October 2017, fast fashion companies were selling feminist t-shirts for $6.99. What does that mean? It means that somebody's not getting paid. And so I really want people to think about these topics, not just in a, I'm the consumer and this is what I want way, but has this been sold to me? Do I even want this clothing? You know, the average American shopper buys 68 garments of clothing a year. That's roughly 1 or 2 a week. That's a lot of clothing, and it's easy to do. It's passively done. It's accepted in our society. Consumerism is sold to us from the minute we're born. It shows up in films. It shows up in media. We're taught that we can buy our way to a better, happier, healthier life. But the truth of the matter is that these systems aren't making us better or happier or healthier. It's destroying our planet. It's hurting other people. It's driving us to debt. And so I hope to unpick a lot of this conversation, so the next time someone is scrolling on Instagram and they see that dress that they think might just change the outcome of their day, they remember that there's a deeper story behind that dress. And what Tim was saying about dull middle-aged men, I hate to tell you about who owns the fast fashion industry, but that's another story. I'm going to wrap it up so that we can get to the conversation.
Okay, thank you. A lot there to unwrap as well. And thank you for your generosity, keeping it short so we can have a good conversation. Farhana Yamin, we're going to come to you next. Now, Farhana is an internationally recognized environmental lawyer, climate change and development policy expert. She has advised leaders and ministers on climate negotiations for 30 years. She's represented small islands and developing countries and really changed the conversation at many of those meetings, and attended nearly every major climate summit since 1991. She's an associate fellow at Chatham House, a director of Impatience Earth, senior advisor to System IQ or Systemic, I never know how to say that, an FRSA and visiting professor, University of the Arts, London. Farhana, we're so honoured to have you here tonight. Over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I guess what I want to start off with is a lot of the 30 years that I've been active, you know, since the very beginning when we started these negotiations, I think I got a lot of things wrong, big time. I think the scientific community, I think the diplomatic community, I think the preponderance of lawyers like myself and economists and experts actually have brought us to, for sure, we've done a great job, but actually the framings are now framings that we need to ditch. What the previous, very humbled by the wonderful panel members, I think in a nutshell, I don't think we should be talking about mitigation of greenhouse gases. That is the main dominant vocabulary and the mindset. And that is what is funded, for example, by foundations and governments. We shouldn't be talking about adaptation. Adaptation to what? We should be talking much more I think, in terms that make sense to ordinary people and that allow them to see how they fit in with their desire to work, to live, to enjoy, to have a convivial life, to have a safe and a secure future. So I've sort of distilled what I want to say into 5 Fs, and the 5 Fs are food, fashion, fuel, finance, and family and friends. That's technically 6, but family and friends is under, you know, our relationships essentially with society and with ourselves and our communities. And I think that Ajay and, you know, Tim and Mikaela have all, you know, taken action to highlight the supply chains and the everyday way in which we come to consume without making any real effort to understand the consequences of those decisions, and the vocabulary and the architecture of climate policies and the climate negotiations and the, you know, the 26 COPs has actually alienated and been very managerial and technocratic, and has stopped people from getting involved and seeing climate change as really climate chaos, as we are at now, as a problem that is fixable and solvable through the very different decisions that we make as individuals, through the very different decisions that are made every day in these sectors. I think the other point that I feel I've learned, and I'm sort of emphasizing what I've learned in my story here, is really we've got to put justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion, JEDI, this acronym, which is wonderful. We should all become JEDIs and champions of justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion. We should put that at the heart of all of our efforts, not just climate, but everything that we do. And trust me, if we did that, we would be prioritizing Black and brown people. We would be prioritizing young people. We would be prioritizing those with disabilities, visible and invisible. We would be prioritizing the interests of the global South. We would be prioritizing historical and marginalized communities who have basically been shafted by 400 years worth of a rapacious form of capitalism, which has now, you know, endangered the entire planet. So justice, equality, diversity, and including being JEDIs, you know, which is a great acronym, you know, we can all become, you know, warriors and use those values, those sources, instead of just focusing on carbon capture and storage, instead of just focusing on carbon taxes, instead of just focusing on offsets, instead of just focusing and hoping that the technology will fix it. The technology is already there, thank goodness for our scientists, but we now need a better story. We need not just our scientists, but we need better storytellers. You know that you, Lucy, and all of the people who are here are storytellers as much as anything else, to change and step out of the way in which, as I said, 400 years of history have sort of almost made us think that it's inevitable. The way in which we think, work, buy, purchase, you know, validate ourselves, make ourselves feel better through different choices is good. So it really isn't. And it's now, thanks to, as I said, huge ingenuity, huge leaps in imagination, and huge acts of courage, actually. We are now at the point where we have all the technological solutions that we need. We just need to put them into action. And for that, we need bold leadership. Individually in our own lives, we need to step out of, you know, as I just said, will this dress really make me feel better? Why do I feel crap in the first place? You know, excuse my language. Why do we find it so difficult to switch to, you know, plant-based diets? Why, you know, because we've been told from the age of dot, you know, that you all need milk, you need cheese, you need loads of meat to feel better, instead of looking at all of the other choices that we have. So I think we're at that point where we're really coming together, and Glasgow, and I know I'm coming up to my 6 minutes, was the amazing energy at Glasgow at COP26 was this realization, was this amazing alliance between those who are putting forward what is called a climate justice approach, centering nature, centering people, looking at inequality, and looking at solutions through that lens, and those who are also working on just transition, transforming the economy on the basis of just principles. And I think that will take a little bit of time, but I think uniting those more radical, as it were, solutions and mindsets and values will help us become the societies that we need to be. Thank you.
No, thank you. Absolutely amazing as always. I just wanted to ask you one thing. So you mentioned mitigation when we started off, when you started off, you said, you know, mitigation and adaptation are not the things that we should be focusing on. Mitigation doesn't really mean what people think it means, I always think. Could you just explain what mitigation means in that context?
Well, mitigation means reducing greenhouse gases, right? But people have interpreted it as just reducing them, not getting rid of them. Or, you know, I won't reduce mine. I'll just go and get some offsets from someone else who's reducing theirs. It has never meant a total phase out, which is why I put forward this goal of net zero emissions, like zero. Like first we get to zero. And if you really can't in any short-term way in a particular sector, then you may have some grace periods, or you may be able to use other technological fixes, but it's not a get out card. And I think that, you know, mitigation doesn't make any sense in the real world. It's not a word that anybody uses, but the engineering and energy sector people use that word, and that's, we're sort of stuck with, you know, a framework of policy and law that, you know, doesn't really make sense in the ordinary world. Likewise, adaptation, you know, we're adapting all the time to changes from day to day, to year, you know, we're planning for the future. Every one of us is doing that, you know, through our jobs, where to live, what kind of houses to save for, pensions and so forth. And so people adapt all the time, but it's not something they call adaptation. They just do that as part of their ordinary lives. And we have made it a subset of acronyms and approaches that don't really match, I think, how we can empower different communities and professions. And the climate and ecological emergency, which we now have, you know, people are stepping forward and realizing actually it involves a bit more than just tweaking things here and there. We need a much more fundamental change to everything.
Absolutely. Well, that's what we're all about tonight. So let's bring in the other panelists, and let's widen the discussion a little bit more. But thank you very much for that, Farhana, because as you're right, it is about storytelling for people like us, and language is crucially important, isn't it, that we're making it accessible and understandable. Jedi is genius. We're already getting lots of love for Jedi, by the way. Okay, so let's sort of widen the discussion. Please keep your questions coming in as well. We've got a few really good ones. Tim, I'd like to come back to you, if I may. So we heard from Mikaela a little bit about, well, a lot of detail, very useful detail about how the Stop Cambo campaign worked. And we're starting to really build a picture of the ingredients you need to get from passive to active. You speak really passionately on the needs for young people to be given the mic, given the platform, given the floor. How do you make this happen? What are the steps that we can do apart from just moving out the way? And how do we make sure that people feel confident and enabled and as if it's for them?
Well, the other panelists have spoken very eloquently. So it's all about storytelling. How do you move out of the way? Well, the thing that you do to move out the way is one of the things that we're trying to do at Eden. Gosh, are we slow? But of actually enforcing some age barriers to what we do, because younger people think in a different way, and they're not always more intelligent or smarter. It's a bit like when people say, well, why don't you get a student to do that? And then I always jeer and I say, that's because they're students, let's get a professional. But actually, I think what we're lacking horribly is a complete lack of faith that we've got what it takes to transform the world we live in. Doing our geothermal, for example, every school child I spoke to, and I spoke to hundreds, really understands the science, because it's not science. The center of the earth is as hot as the surface of the sun. The closer you get to it, the easier it is to get you heat, and it will be a very easy thing to mine it. And then everybody tells us you can't. Who put up the money to say that you couldn't? Who influenced the European Commission to say there should be no grants for it? Oh, they were big energy companies. Now that we've done it, and we're going to go completely energy into regenerative energy by probably May next year, everybody's now thinking, crikey, wait, what, can we do it everywhere? And you go, yeah. And then people say, oh no, you can only do it down to 5 kilometers or so on. but you can actually do it everywhere in this country. And there are vested interests telling you can't. That's why we're doing it. You see, part of all of this is to do it, to stop people who are chatterers coming up with their theory. If you demonstrate that you can grow this stuff, if you can demonstrate that you can build this, if you can demonstrate the engineering and get the young people to start doing it and realize that the jobs that they can be going for are just so exciting. God, I wish I was young. I mean, but no, but you see, the problem is we're sent into a schooling system where everything is siloed, but the future jobs are actually almost like a pick and mix in the old Woolworths. You need to put them all together. So you need a bit of marketing, a bit of visioning, a bit of this, a bit of that, the other. And you know what? In our country, our A levels, you cannot get an A level in design and technology. How crazy is that? It's much more important to learn about the kings and queens of Britain. Now, I'm having a bit of a rant because simply I think that we don't get angry enough about what we physically can do. Farhana was actually saying it. We could have a carbon tax. Why are we dithering like we've got some kind of problem? We could have. It would alter the world radically. I mean, absolutely radically. So you've got to ask, we've got to let the young children bite Boris Johnson's kneecaps. But also, those of us who, to our shame or perhaps our luck, are in that so-called establishment of opinion formers, ought to be brave enough to speak regularly power to power.
But as Mikaela,
power to power.
As Mikaela reminds us, Tim, there's no heroes going to come to save us because, you know, they're not fit for purpose. So we can't wait for them to find courage, can we?
No, but actually, you know what? This is awfully rude. I went to a dinner party the other night with a whole bunch of people who were well over 60, who were county set, and they were actually talking in astonishment that the electric car was taking off and wanted some advice because it never occurred to them it was going to take off. And then when I started talking about all these other things that we're talking about now, they had this look as if they'd been slapped with a wet haddock. No, but this stuff isn't being talked about on television or on radio, not properly, not like it's a grown-up citizenship issue. We've got to actually, I think the major thing, and Mikaela did it brilliantly, and Farhana did it, and Aja did it, we've got to actually say, okay, you've got your consumerist self, now reinvent yourself as a citizen. What are you going to do for the world you live in?
Okay, very good. Aja, on that note, what does fashion look like in this transition? Is it gone completely and there's no more need for it?
No, I mean, until we live in a world where we can all be naturists, we have to wear clothing. So there will
I'm not going to start that trend.
I don't mind, but you know, I'm just saying some people like clothes. I like clothes. I actually love the industry, which is why I don't want it to eat itself, but that is the direction that it seems to be going in. A world that is, you know, just a little bit better as far as fashion goes is one where there is power evenly distributed. Nothing good can come of a business model where all the money flows to the top into the hands of someone who is outrageously wealthy, and the people doing the biggest, hardest work at the bottom do not make enough money to eat. So that's the first thing. Equal distribution of power. And once that happens, I feel like that will be a big catalyst for shaking out some of the other issues. There was a really great article that came out about a book about how paying living wages can actually really positively impact the sustainability issues that we see within the fashion supply chain. And so the first thing that I think needs to happen is power has to be shared. And currently the model that fashion runs on, that is just not a possibility at all.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do you see, well, fast fashion, which is a system of production, will that exist or should it be abolished?
Abolish it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, keep the questions coming. Mikaela, I want to speak to you again about that, the work that you have done, the work that you continue to do. And we've heard a little bit from Farhana about the constant, the enemy, if you like, and the tricks that they use and the constant ways of undermining your work and inveigling themselves with the public and trying to own what sustainability means. There's so many different things in the playbook. what is the cost to you and to people who are effective activists and take on this work seriously? Because there is a cost, isn't there?
Yeah, I think like I'm really hesitant to make out that activism can't be fun, because it can be so much fun and it can be so exciting. And I think that it's important that we make movements that people want to move towards. And that means that we need to be like enjoying the work that we're doing. But like that being said, there is also like a hard fight, and there's a lot that you face in that. I mean, in taking the UK government to court, I ended up with my name in like alt-right articles that were writing articles about me, and I got scared about my safety in different ways because of that. I've had to kind of change a lot of how I live my life and what I decide to share, because of those reasons. And it is really exhausting sometimes when you put in so many hours of like your like free labor into doing this work, because it's important for all of us. And then you see everything that you've been saying packaged by an oil company on their Twitter to talk about themselves as if they are so green and so much better. And these companies, they pursue this social license to exist. They want, there's basically this idea that all of us allow these companies to exist and get subsidies and are given approval by the fact that we think that they're okay, like we think they're all right. So that's why they plug so much money into these greenwashing campaigns, into making it look like they're more renewable energy companies rather than fossil fuel companies, or them talking about Black Lives Matter when they are still killing people in countries that are majority Black people. Like they will do all these different things. And I think there is a point at which it can get to you, like how much money they have and power they have, and it can feel overwhelming. I know that in like since COP, actually, I hit burnout really badly because I think I put too much pressure on myself as an individual to fix things or to do things. And it meant that I fell into a bit of a climate doom spiral and felt like really overwhelmed by everything. But the reality is, I think I've found that when I lean into the work that brings me so much joy, and a lot of that is working with other people and being parts of the like behind the scenes organizing movements and that kind of stuff, when I lean into that, then I'm not doomy, and I'm not overwhelmed by the weight of this situation or how much power they have. And instead I actually realize how much power we have. Like I have to almost every day remind myself that me and my friend stopped an oil field from being approved. If I'm ever feeling sad, I'm like, you know what, we did that, like, and we can do that again. And so even if it's looking not that great, every single small thing that we stop is worth it. And for me, even just like keeping that mindset has helped me tackle the kind of burnout or the other stuff that can come with it.
Thank you for being so honest and authentic and about your personal situation. I know we've got lots of questions already coming through about sorts of activism, what people should do, so we'll come to that in a minute. Farhana, I just wanted to go to you off the back of what Mikaela said. There's more that we could have done to help Mikaela, I think, isn't there? So how do you think that if you're not going to be a frontline activist, what can we do to support? And, you know, the JEDI acronym, absolutely brilliant, but it seems to provoke a very toxic response. You know, just before we met, just reading a headline in the newspapers about Lord Frost saying that we need to get rid of all the green, I can't remember what he called us, but green zealots or whatever. You know, I mean, it's active hostility. How do you stare that down, and how do you support people like Mikaela and get involved?
Well, I've done that through. Oh yeah, thank you. Well, I think, look,
thank you. How
friends
nice.
and family. So that last F is the most important thing. Locate yourself as you start your own personal journey of change. Be active in your community. I started working in and paying as much attention to what happens in my high street and my local community. So I think community is the new COP. We cannot leave each other and expect, you know, one-off summits or one-off campaigns to do the work. We have to turn up and show up for each other, take lots of rest. Personally, you know, I also had, just to echo what Mikaela is saying, this is hard. And there are people who made our lives hard and who have wreaked havoc on the planet knowingly. And so my sort of joining in with Extinction Rebellion and not using non-violent civil disobedience as a final resort, you know, after then 25 years of negotiations, it was like, what can I do, you know, in the face of billions being poured after the Paris Agreement? you know, yeah, I glued myself to Shell, and I understand and support the frustrations. I understand and support the anger that is there amongst young people, amongst the global South now, which is bearing the cost, the full-on cost of unmitigated climate change. So go back to my old nerdy vocabulary. There is no natural weather left anymore. There is no single event, extreme event, whether it's a typhoon or hurricane. It has all been magnified, amplified, and it has the fingerprint of change that could have been prevented. So I think just simply acknowledging that's really important. And just one final thing, people are a bit afraid of sort of anger, the anger of the global South, the anger of activists, you know, of Greta's, you know, sort of, you know, the way she talks sometimes. And actually, you know, that's coming from a really good place, and that anger must be acknowledged and held and respected instead of dismissed or belittled, because it's a further injustice when you dismiss the hurt and the injustice further and sort of ask people to, you know, come back and talk nicely or submit a paper, you know, go and submit a submission to the UNFCCC again. So I carry on doing that, but I think we can help each other by saying all of us are doing and need to do more. We need to think about how our professions, as I said, our high street, our local communities, our hospitals, schools, every single sphere has to change now. And COVID showed us that we can do things as a global society and as a big society. We can do emergencies, you know, and we can, if we put justice at the heart of the way in which we dealt with the pandemic, we would have ended this pandemic much quicker than is the uneven progress now. So I think that sense of solidarity is really key.
Just very quickly, you mentioned the sort of complexities of the UN whatever it is, FCCC, and having to submit papers, which are obviously for small nations in particular is a really big task. Do you think if nature and climate were more put together in these processes, that would be more effective?
Absolutely. So one of the things that's only recently, you know, become part of the negotiations is land, our relationship with the land. Actually, we all have a relationship with the land. Sometimes we've taken over the lands of other people, or do that by having a much larger footprint. You know, we are responsible through the food choices and the fast food and fashion that we consume for what is happening to the lands of other people. So I think bringing land and the indigenous people who came, second largest delegation in Glasgow was the indigenous people. The first largest, the largest was the fossil fuel industry, much larger than any single country put together. So a long way to go, but we're fighting back, and that is a source of joy and a source of solutions. You know.
Okay, thank you very much, Farhana. I'm going to start taking some questions, if that's okay with our panelists, because there's loads of them. Tim, I'm going to come to you from Rosie. How are we going to deal with the energy crisis and the pushback against green energy investments?
By producing energy cheaply, renewably. The disproportionate investment in those areas is such that, I mean, you do know that for example, Rolls-Royce and a number of companies, probably our friends Koji and Yosuke, are micro-nuclear is a big thing going on, which it stalled after the 3 Mile Island disaster when it was going to be introduced, and now a thorium-based small nuclear reactor is being proposed. I think it's really interesting. Let us make no bones about it. We environmentalists are just as dumb sometimes as the people we oppose, because the media mantra of if it bleeds, it leads means we have to say things more and more extreme in order to get heard. We have also sometimes fallen into the trap of proposing that the world is coming to an end next week, and then it doesn't, and then everybody thinks that we're fibbers. I think energy is going to nosedive. The fossil fuel energy is going to nosedive, but we're in the death throes of it. Just imagine you have a market cap of as much as these guys have got, and actually it's worth a fraction of that, because these are what are called stranded assets. They're never going to be used. If we do stick to our international agreements to be down to no fossil fuels by 2050, it's already a disaster for them. So I'm very unsympathetic, but I think actually the combination of geothermal and solar, and the hydrogen, which is, I mean, gosh, have you seen how much money is being put into hydrogen technology in British universities? It is utterly vast. And
but does that mean it's going to lead to a result, though? That's the
yes,
question.
It will. The issue is that we've got this pathetic business culture in this country where we keep investing in the stuff that's always been there. If Brunel was alive today, he'd be turning around, he'd be chomping on his cigar and saying, let's go and do this stuff. We used to be the world leaders in this engineering stuff. And I actually think, I don't know what the rest of the panel feel or what Rosie feels, is the biggest problem we've got is that we're not saying this technology is going to make you so much money. It's going to be so good. It's going to enable cheap agriculture, cheap this, cheap that, cheap the other, but there will be profits. Why are we selling this as if it's a hair shirt? It's not. It's an absolute dawning of a new enlightenment. Wherever I look, I'm thinking, why are people saying, oh, this is a bandage on our problem? These aren't bandages on a problem. These are opportunities for a completely new civilization to come out of.
I must say, I'm not sure that we explained it properly, completely, Tim, but when you made reference before to hot water 5,000 meters below your ass, is I think how you described it, but you're talking about Eden geothermal, and I did come and look at it when he was still drilling, and it was probably one of the most exciting days out I've ever had. And that's not just because I'm sad, it was just genuinely thrilling to see the team there, including young geologists who are from Cornwall, where this is based, with their eyes shining, saying they never thought that they would be able to work in their industry in renewable energy in where they live, where they're from. You know, it was a terribly, terribly exciting thing. I'm going to come to you, Mikaela, because I'm afraid Belinda Perriman is not convinced at all. Without Cambo, I'm afraid that we will likely import the same oil volume from the US at 10 times the cost of the UK. We'll lose jobs, communities, personal income, tax revenues, etc., etc. And she claims that we're ignoring that we can capture 95% of the CO2 before that comes from oil feeds before it enters the atmosphere. I would imagine that you encounter that opposition a lot, and I would imagine that you disagree with it entirely.
Yeah, I completely disagree with that, because I think there's a lot of misinformation that's put out there by the fossil fuel industry, especially the fossil fuel industry in the UK, and this idea that, like, if we don't extract oil and gas from the UK, then the UK will just be like left desolate or whatever else. When the reality is the UK currently exports almost 80% of the crude oil that it produces here, and some of its gas is also exported. So currently we're exporting the majority of what's made here. We don't need to take out any more. And I think that there's this misunderstanding perhaps of, like, we just need to stop global extraction of oil and gas. That means everywhere. And so we can't just make more. If we stop making it here, doesn't mean that elsewhere they're going to also kind of be balancing out, unless we actually decide to create change. And what the UK needs to do is be a leader in this kind of transition, and be one of the first countries to come out and say we're no longer going to be supporting and funding this declining industry. When we talk about tax as well, this is what our court case was actually about. It was about the fact that the UK is the most profitable place in the world for offshore oil and gas producers, because the tax regime in the UK is so profitable. These companies have been given £4 billion of public money in direct payments since the Paris Agreement was signed. That's £4 billion of public money that could be being used for public good, but it's instead funding these same companies that are paying their shareholders huge amounts of profit. So Shell were given £400 million in public payments from the government since 2016. And in that same period of time, they paid their shareholders £4 billion. So these companies have a huge amount of money. And what we need to be doing is moving away from them having a monopoly over all of us. This kind of ties into also talking about the energy crisis. I think that this should show us that we cannot rely on fossil fuels anymore, that this is a dying industry. And what we actually need is a nationalized energy grid where actually the people own energy instead, and it's renewable and it's stable, and it's not going to be at the bidding of these companies that just want to make huge amounts of profit. And so I do really understand people's worries about all of this, but the reality is that we're in a crisis where we cannot just carry on as we've been going so far, and fossil fuels are literally going to destroy all of our well-being and our livelihoods if we don't stop taking them out of the ground. And we have the ability to actually make something better. I'm not saying that the choice is either we stop taking fossil fuels out of the ground and things are a little bit better. It's like, it's not about making the world a little bit less pants. It's like, actually, let's make the world really great where people aren't having these energy crises, where people can actually afford to like heat their homes. And we have the ability to do that if we pursue things like the Green New Deal or different strategies like that.
Yes, can I just make a little plea for community energy as well, which seems to have been given the heave-ho by the UK, even though there's some successful projects here, but it's worth a look. Belinda, if you could have a look at some community energy projects, you might start to feel differently about it, I don't know. But and also Mikaela mentioned the International Energy Agency as being very conservative. I mean, look at their projections. It's over for fossil fuel. Okay, so Aja, we're going to come to you. There's a similar sort of vibe to this first question I'm going to ask you. If we stop buying the goods that exploit workers, won't that make things worse for them in the short term?
Yeah, so this is once again a narrative that has been put out again and again by the same fashion industry that refuses to pay many of these workers. And so there's this narrative that the worker is so dependent on the international business of these companies where they're billionaires upon billionaires at the top, and they're not paying their garment workers, but then without us, they will starve. And part of what I've tried to debunk in my book is that a lot of the places in which our clothing and fashion is produced actually have their own thriving industries that could be great. You know, when we think about colonialism and we think about the East India Company, a lot of that was about disrupting the garment trade in India. And so we need to look at our history there and look at who's producing stuff and who has materials and who has labor, and stop acting like, you know, countries that are so resource rich and labor rich need us in order to be profitable, in order to have fair systems. That's simply not true. That's a attitude based in colonialism, which is what I try and debunk within my book.
Yes, you do it really well. And I'm also thinking to that on the sort of flip side, if we look at ourselves as a global end market, as in we're like a cul-de-sac for stuff that's not made here, that's also really disempowering to be a consumer in that situation, because you basically just receiving stuff and then generating waste and sending it back.
We won't buy ourselves to sustainability. That's not the solution. I would argue the person who chooses to not buy anything at all is actually being way more sustainable than the person that goes out and has to buy a brand new sustainable wardrobe so they look like they're winning at the sustainability game. In actuality, I always tell people, please just wear your old fast fashion. Really, like, and you can have a conversation about it as well. You know, if somebody compliments the dress I'm wearing and it wasn't probably made in the best ways, I can have a conversation about why I no longer buy from that brand in particular, but also that brand didn't make one of that dress. They made millions of it. Just hop on the resale market. You can probably find the same dress, new with tags, hanging in someone's wardrobe who felt like they had to buy it because that's what all the advertising and media tells us.
Yeah, and it's number of wears, isn't it? That is the kind of useful metric as well. Okay, another question for you, Aja, while I'm with you. Now this is another narrative that comes up a lot. Someone can do everything right, plant-based diet, no flights, low carbon travel, and still know that alone their actions make no difference unless everyone joins in. How do we answer that? We're hearing a lot of individual actions don't make any difference.
I try and avoid this debate because I think it's just it takes us away from actually doing the work and making change within ourselves. We have to change our culture. That is ultimately a huge part of the narrative that people really don't want to acknowledge because change is scary. It's the same ways in which people go, okay, well, what about the fossil fuel industry if that doesn't exist? What about the jobs? There are so many jobs in a green economy. That is a tremendous way to really, really build new job markets, is to embrace the green economy. But that's not the narrative that we're hearing because the fossil fuel industry would really prefer that you think that we need to be dependent on them. And so I think when we do these sort of individual action versus, you know, top-down action, government action, we still neglect to acknowledge that we have to change our culture ultimately. The culture of having to buy a new dress every single time you have an event That's a part of this problem. That's a part of the culture that we need to change. And so ultimately, I think when a lot of us are making those individual changes and not just feeling pleased with ourselves, but encouraging people within our community, our friendship groups to make the same sorts of changes, that's when we start to have a real cultural shift. And so I am all for the individual action, but don't keep it to yourself. Talk to your friends about it. Start an Instagram platform about it. Have a conversation, join the community, because when we do that, we can tackle so many of the other problems that we see surrounding a lot of these different issues. When we talk about, uniform exchanges at schools, we're taking the burden off of a parent who might not have the money for new uniforms every year. So there's a lot of ways in which we can really have a fun conversation while changing the culture and how we participate in these systems. And that's what I'm definitely up for.
Yeah, exactly. And also you're basically having a wider impact and a social impact as well, which you shouldn't be forgotten about. Thank you very much for that. Very good. Tim Vivian says you can do A-level design and technology. Point of order. I'll leave you to mull on that. Farhana, there's a very interesting comment here, which I want to turn into a question, and there's a question that sort of goes with it. Francis says, in England, people are subjects and need to learn to be citizens. It's so frustrating. And I'd like to add onto that. I can't, oh yes, somebody has said, how when they're photophobic, publicity phobic, how do they help? How do they get involved? They might not want to be on social media, and they might not want to be like frontline, and also nervous about breaking up old friendships. We said those F's, friendships and family, very, very important. Sometimes it can lead you into, really quite confrontational situations when people don't share your viewpoint. Any advice?
Well, I guess on that one, for the first 20 years of my life as a climate lawyer, I used to never have a playground conversation or talk to anyone, any one of my friends about this subject. So the fact that actually, now, the crisis is, discussed on the news, on the media, is very much down to the movements, the social movements, and the demand for this coverage to happen. And the media used to report every now and then. But so now it's great that it is part of everyday conversations that you can have. And that means, we learn to accept the diversity of views. We learn to accept the diversity of situations. We are respectful of where people are and their starting points. Not everyone can go and buy an electric car. Most of the people in the borough that I live in Camden, don't have cars. So there's no point going on and on about e-cars. There's no, for a lot of communities, there's no point going on and on about plant-based diets, because, they just have a bed sit or a studio flat and one microwave or one oven where you can it's the easiest thing to do is put in chicken burgers and chicken wings and stuff like that. So I totally understand that this need for Jedi centered approaches is to look at where everybody is and the choices that they have, but at the same time to press and ask pesky questions of each other and to allow everyone to come to their own understandings, and I think, again, COVID has made a massive difference to people's thinking. They have seen the importance of frontline workers. They've seen the importance of people who are at different risks, either because of their jobs or their ethnicities or other risk factors. So it's not, to do with personal choice. So I think all of those issues affect the way in which we can now come to the problem, and we're all starting at different points, but we all need to change, and the speed and pace at which we can change is going to depend largely on how much help and coordinated policy that we have. So I'm still very much an activist, and I feel like, find your niche. It may be you're great at leafleting, it may be that you're great at design, it may be that you're a behind the scenes person and you do spreadsheets. You don't have to ever meet anybody. So not everybody has to be front and center and a great communicator. You can do a lot more behind the scenes, and for every front of house person, for every Mikaela, I think there's actually about 20 people needed behind the scenes to support all of that. So there's a place in a support infrastructure that's needed Again, I would say start in your workplace. So one of the ideas that we've been having is that every workplace should have a rail where you can bring clothes and have a swap. So it's there. So it's bring one, take one. You know, some places have that. It's very simple. You get one of those little rails and just have, and that instills a shift in people's thinking. They see it and they don't have to go to a shop to buy something. And they can think that their colleagues can provide them with clothes. So the swapping culture is already happening, and there are a whole load of apps that are now making, you know, reusing clothes or borrowing clothes or leasing handbags possible. So I think we're at a really exciting moment. And like AJ, I love fashion too, but I think there are so many nicer ways of doing it. And maybe we'll have a return of artisan culture and tailoring. Like I learned to sew. I was told to sew. My gender, my age was like, you know, everyone had to learn to sew. And so maybe those skills will come back, just as on our high street we're seeing the return of, you know, artisan bakeries, artisan shops, and that has got to become affordable and for everyone.
I'm just saying this because you mentioned volunteering for things behind the scenes, and I know I think Franny Armstrong's with us tonight, and she let me volunteer to do the social media on Riverside, so thank you, Franny. Mikaela, you wanted to come in on people and different roles, I think.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of add to what Farhana was saying, which is so true about the fact that there's so much that happens behind the scenes that's not glamorous or might not seem as exciting, but it's so needed, and everyone will have their different role. And quickly, I was going to just share this in the link, but I did a post where I shared some of the like roles that you could do, things like making cups of tea actions. That is a role that someone needs to do, like supporting people through well-being, like designing things. And you just need to find like the kind of overlap between what brings you joy, what's needed for climate justice, and what you're actually good at. And they talk about that in All You Can Save, which is also brilliant as well. So I'll just add that link there if anyone's looking for it. Another thing that's very quickly is find a group in your local area, reach out to them, ask them what they need, and see if you can help with that.
Yeah, okay. And Aja, thank you for answering in there as well. There's people are answering questions all over the place. It's very dynamic. I've slightly lost control, but never mind. I like it this way. Okay, so in a second, we're going to bring in Koji and Yosuke, and we're going to start getting some final messages from people. And I'm just going to do a couple more questions before. I just want to prepare you. We're not going to be able to answer all of the questions. I'm really sorry about that. So I'm really glad, actually, Farhana, you mentioned chicken, because that was a question here. You know, what do people who need to feed their family? You can feed a family on a £3 chicken. Where's the storytelling? I'm slightly going to answer that. The storytelling is in the fact that we need to make sure that people have access to the whole chicken, because, you know, a lot of supermarkets would like you just to be able to buy the more expensive breast meat, and, you know, supply chain and going back to food deserts, and people can't get to, you know, bigger stores that sell the whole bird and give the value. And obviously food pricing is a massive issue at the moment. Aja, I just want to quickly ask you on that. When you're storytelling these you know, stories of transition and sustainability, they can sound like different planets to people who are on a limited budget and the realities of food price hikes and all the rest of it. Do you think we're sensitive enough, and how do you tell those stories?
So the notion that the person with the limited budget really has to change that much about their life is actually patently ridiculous. Most of the time, people with limited budgets are the first ones to repair and to reuse and to wear hand-me-downs. I mean, I grew up with a parent who grew up in relative poverty, and that definitely impacted how I was dressed as a child. I wore a lot of hand-me-downs, and I hid that from my peers because it wasn't very cool. That was the type of stuff that got you made fun of. And so I think the notion that the person with the extreme limited budget is, you know, contributing to the 68 garments a year is just, that's a myth. I think we need to really look at who's doing the damage there, and sort of be like, if that's you, then maybe slice that in half to 30 garments a year. But if you're the person that has to choose between, you know, buying from a brand that isn't very sustainable or not dressing yourself, then I will never, ever be the person that's going to say, oh, you need to make some changes. That's just patently false. That's not the person that can afford to buy 68 items of clothing a year.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, to finish off with, I'd like to sort of do a round of our panelists, and also with Koji and Yosuke, and just ask for resources, final points, and tips that people can do to be part of the transition. So we bring the guys back. You can also add in short comments about anything that you've heard. Let's start with you, Koji, if that's okay. And if you've got anything that you would like to add in this just before we finish.
You know how difficult it is to make any comments after this really, really heated discussion. All the jetters, thank you. So I really like this idea of, I think it was Farhana that commented on the power of ordinary people. I think she said that the community is a new cope, and I think she encouraged for us to find our own niches to really start the change. And I think so in that perspective, like we're all Jedis, but we're not like, not everybody is woke, not everybody knows that we are. And but I think this realization that we all have this power to change the macro system through a very small efforts that we can make in our everyday ordinary life. I think what Mikaela said, and I think in that process we can go from passive to active. I think that transition is really, really important. You know, like many of the people who are listening to or watching this seminar, sometimes you feel kind of like you're in a very passive situation where you just have to react to the macro landscape or, you know, very high level political decisions. But as we make these small efforts, we can learn from being you know, the recipients of those changes to an active creator of it. And that's a very encouraging message that I took from this seminar. And thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Yosuke, I don't know what you want to say, but I also think we haven't really talked about inspiration that much. So if there's any resources that you'd like to mention that people could go and look at as well. For example, you mentioned to me the other day, Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, and I went to watch it. And it's amazing. It really transformed my whole thinking. Anyway, over to you.
Yeah, first of all, I also would like to thank you everyone who spoke today and also everyone who asked questions. It was really, really great. It was such a wonderful conversation and inspiring discussion, and especially how sort of everyone is building their commenting on others answering the question and stuff like that. This kind of build up and furthering of discussion and ideas is the exactly kind of things that we wanted to spark through the creation of this project and website. So I'm extremely happy about this, so thank you. And couple of things that I noted down includes like storytelling, the importance of language, finding the community you can grow with, breaking this false faith that we can't transform things, 5Fs and Jedi, new fashion aesthetics that sent us justice at its core. I think these are great ingredients as creative practitioner who works on envisioning things and new what's coming, what's next. These are great ingredients and keywords to sleep on today and start working on and creating visuals, images, and prototypes. So I'm super excited about it and the positive change we might potentially be able to make together. So thank you very much. On that Nautica, I think, yeah, it's not that, you know, these speculative design is obviously not the practice that I invented. There's been many practitioners and visionaries and theorists who have been talking about doing things, or not necessarily talking and practicing without necessarily realizing. Nautica of the Wind Valley is one of those like creations, right? That really sort of is a Japanese anime classics, but also it gives a great insight into this broken human nature relationships and how it might recover or might not recover, depending on how you look at things. And it sparks debates. It's exactly the kind of things that we are having now. So I think that the power of design, power of creation, power of art, power of creating dreams and visuals I believe in that power. And then I'm really empowered by listening to all of you now that everyone is kind of, tipping, giving bits and pieces of power and hope and help to each other, and creating this new vision together. So I'm extremely happy about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We want a final sort of call for action, or you can mention something that people need to go and do now. Just give our audience a final thought. Sorry, I know I always hate it when hosts do this, but there we are. Okay, Aja, we're going to start with you.
Final thoughts, I would say, find your people, find your place in all of this, recognize what you are good at and try and do that. And, be open to learning, do the reading. There's so many good books out there that have been written before I even threw my hat into this ring. Try and get back there and read that so that you can really add and build to the conversation in an important way. But there is room for you in all of these movements. There really are. And if you don't see your spot, then that means that maybe it's time for you to make that spot and find something. But there's room for you in all of these movements. And if you want to get involved, the cool thing is that we have the internet, and that's a great place to start.
Okay, thank you. Tim?
Well, I'd like to start by saying we should all stop using the word change, because it is one of the most disliked words in the English language or any language. We don't like change, but we do like rediscovering some virtue of the past. And if we're rediscovering a virtue of the past, I would bring to our collective minds, waste not, want not. We haven't talked collectively here about the circular economy and what that might mean in the future. I know we all talked about it privately, but not here. The world is actually morally set to be, Farhana's plaything. We have laws which make it virtually treasonous to pollute our rivers, to poison our land, to make our air unbreathable. Why is it then that we somehow want to have the written law, but we don't enforce it? It's obvious that we actually recognize we need to do these things, and somehow we fall in thrall of powerful interests that stop us carrying these things. Farhana wrote a wonderful reply there. So I would say that the most important things that we collectively need to do is to persuade our friends, the lawyers and the activists, and everybody to get together to say, if we just enforced what is already the law as it was intended to be interpreted, we would be able to do probably 60-odd%. You then add a carbon tax, and then you realize that doing everything as a system, as opposed to fashion or food or this, that, the other, will give us huge gains, and we'll be there. My very last thing is,
okay, you're gonna be running out of time.
Amazing doing the sign language.
Yeah. Now she has to sign that, which is amazing. Okay. Farhana, very briefly, if you will, we've got to read you according to Tim, which is good advice.
Okay. Well, I've held off writing books because I think practice and doing things is the most important way in which we will change really hearts and minds and learn. There is no manual out there. We'll get fabulous insights. We've got fabulous, traditions. Our indigenous leaders, our elders have been doing a lot of this stuff, and it was right. And we need to, essentially, I would say in a nutshell, change our high streets, our industrial landscape, and our mindsets will change as a result of the practices. And again, COVID made us do that. COVID, let's continue with some of the practices that came out of that. I think that's the most important thing I can say to do. Put that.
Okay, thank you, Mikaela.
I think I'd add to, if we're not going to talk about change, let's talk about transformation, because for me, that's what motivates me, because I think climate justice offers us transformation of the world as we see it now. And that's exciting. That's so exciting. I wouldn't be able to fight if I was just fighting to maintain the world as it is now, because the world as it is now is built upon exploitation and harm and violence in so many different ways. But what we have is the ability to create something better. And that's so exciting. And I hope that everyone watching this is like, wow, I'm going to go do something now that I've heard that. And the thing you can do is Stock Cambo is hosting a series of trainings. We've got a climate justice training, which I'm doing with Young Friends of the Earth Scotland, which is on the 1st of February, which I think is next week. And we also have a Just Transition training happening as well on the 10th of February. The details of all of those are on Stock Cambo. Also, this year is going to be a big year for opposing oil fields and opposing the subsidies that the UK government gives to oil and gas fields and companies. So please follow Paid to Pollute and support our work. We have a North Sea 101 series, which you can learn more about all this stuff there. And there's a petition you can sign, and there's loads of ways you can get involved. Stock Cambo, we have welcome meetings every other week that you can join, and it's a really practical way that you can get involved in opposing the bad stuff and also building the good stuff too.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So World in Transformation, we've come to the end of our session. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just been absolutely incredible, and wish we had more time. A special thanks to Hitachi, Takram, Zettler and 5x15, to our panelists, and to the BSL sign interpreters helping us this evening, who will once again sign our thanks and how brilliant they are. To the audience, you have been wonderful. I will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Bye.
Thank you, Lucy. You're brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you to the audience. Amazing questions as well.
Yeah, they were very good questions. Thank you.